And let me go ahead and start the recording on my end. Pradeep, are you recording on your end?
Thanks for reminding me.
All right. Recording on this computer. This is Male Entrepreneur Podcast, and we are live in 3, 2. All right, welcome back to Male Entrepreneur, the podcast for men who win, with your host, Purdeep Sangha. And it looks like we got a very special guest lined up for this week's episode as well. Pradeep, how you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, man. Yeah, we got a super cool guest here. We have Dr. John Schinnerer. I didn't just totally, blast his name too bad there, but he's a super cool guy. He's got an awesome podcast as well. Let him talk about that. But he is a men's relationship coach. And, on this podcast, we talk a lot about business. We talk a lot about the personal side, and we talk a lot about relationships and how relationships can either give us a push, but they can also screw us up as well. So if we're not careful, we don't pick the right people, if we don't do our part in terms of what we need to do as men in relationships, we can be either living great lives or being screwed. So that's why we have Dr. John here joining us. So thanks, Dr. John. Totally appreciate you taking the time out.
My pleasure, Pradeep and Nathan. How you guys doing today?
We're doing awesome. We're doing awesome. So, Dr. I was on your podcast. We had a great conversation. We hit it off. You have, some great insight when it comes to relationships. That's the work that you do. So can you tell me, tell the audience, because we're all guys, well, actually there's some women listening as well, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you see with men in relationships and how you help them overcome them?
Well, the biggest challenges to me have to do with how we're socialized as men, especially going back to when we're boys and how we grow up. And, there's this idea of the man box culture, which I think is dead spot on. And it's the idea that when we're little, think kindergarten through high school, we get socialized by peers, coaches, media, teachers, could be your father, but we pick up these rules, and the rules are they're really common. If you ask like middle school and high school boys, what does it mean to be a man? The rules are very similar. It's be invincible, be self-reliant, be invulnerable, don't feel, dominate women, be the provider, be strong, don't ask for help. And there's some good in there, but there's also some things that are fraught with peril. And the other part of it, the part that really speaks to me, is this idea that when we're growing up, if we show too much sadness or fear, someone will inevitably say at some point in our development, dude, stop being such a pussy. Don't be a girl. Don't be a bitch. And if we show too much excitement, joy, love, romanticism, flamboyance, for God's sake, then someone will hit us with, don't be gay, don't be such a fag. Forgive the language, but that's what we get growing up. And you learn really quickly as a young man, if you're at all smart and or sensitive, holy shit, I don't like the way that feels. I'm going to jump back in this little box where I'm safe and I won't be mocked and humiliated. So what are we left with that we can publicly display in terms of emotion? We're left with three things. There's lust. She's so hot, I'd do her. Stress. I'm so stressed. Look at me, I'm busy and important. Or the big one, anger, some degree of anger, irritability, annoyance, frustration, rage. But most of what we feel comes out through that anger lens. And so then we get into a relationship as adults, and our spouses, the biggest complaint I hear from women is, I can't connect with my husband. He's not sympathetic, he's not empathetic, he's not communicative, he's not emotionally aware. Well, we've been socialized in exactly the opposite way. Growing up, we've been mocked and humiliated for what our wives now want in a partner. And there's this idea that the expectations that women have for their partners in marriage has changed radically in the past 50 to 60 years. When they got into the workforce in the 70s and got more financial empowerment, that their expectations for a partnership changed. That, yeah, they want a lifelong romantic partnership. They want someone to meet them financially, but they also want someone that is communicative, sympathetic, empathetic, supportive, and understanding. And that's where I see a lot of the problems coming up for men today.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. I think that's the interesting dynamic of being a man, is you have to be able to balance both sides there, right? You got to be able to stand your ground when it comes to other men, and even in your own relationship with women, you have to be able to stand your ground, because I also get, it's kind of interesting because I get the flip side. I get women coming to me and saying, Pradeep, can you work with my men because they need to man up? And so that's really interesting, because I see women now kind of, in between both spectrums. I see women that want guys that are more sensitive, and then I see women that want guys that step it up.
So
It's a really
pardon me for interrupting. What age group are we talking about there?
Oh, we're talking about women in their 40s, women in their
Okay.
40s and
Because I
50s.
could see
Yeah.
that more so in maybe 20s, 30s to 40s. Because I think there's this knock on the millennials that they're too emotionally sensitive, that they're too in touch with their emotions. So I think there are some generational differences.
Oh, absolutely. And so what are you seeing with newer relationships? That would be interesting, actually, to see the younger generation. Are you seeing some trends there?
Yeah, some of the trends that are interesting to me is that there's evidence that the marriage rate among millennials is on the decline, which is unusual. And one of the hypotheses for that is that there's a shortage of marriage quality men among millennials. In other words, and I've seen this, and this is more anecdotal, but I've seen it among some of my younger clients that are failure to launch, that are maybe 25 to late 20s, living with their parents still, smoking weed and gaming, because it's easier to do that than it is to go out and face their anxieties and fears and try.
Oh, that's interesting. That is really interesting to see. And I actually, here's my personal perspective too. I kind of have a fear, because I actually have heard some of that as well, where I've heard that the guys are just not mature enough. They're not stepping up from that age. So I can see that trend. It's actually kind of worrisome having a son, and he's only 7 years old. He's going to be 7, but it's like, okay, hopefully he gets to the stage where he can be that man that he needs to be for a woman, both be tough enough, but also have that soft side as well.
Well, and your point is well taken from earlier, that I think what we're really shooting for is a balance between the head and the heart, between masculine and feminine, I want the men out there to be masculine. I want them to be strong. I want them to be resilient and tough. And I also want them to be able to tap into how they feel. I want them to be able to communicate with that person that they love primarily. So it's a lot. We're asking a lot of men, or I'm asking a lot of men, I should say. And I also think it's one of the few goals to strive for in this lifetime, because part of what we're trying to do is break generational patterns. Break the pattern of the dad calling the son a pussy. Break the pattern of, hey, look, if my son's crying, I'm going to give him permission to cry. Like, that's okay. Whatever you're feeling is okay. Now, how you behave as a result of that feeling, that may or may not be okay. So you can be angry, but you can't punch me. You can be angry, but you can't call me names, for instance.
So do you find in the work that you do that when you're working with men or couples in a relationship, does it change, or does it have an impact in terms of how they parent their children?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny, the whole man box kind of idea, I think, is a really powerful one, because I think when I've shared this idea with women, it gives them more compassion for their men generally. Mm-hmm. When I share the idea with men, one of the things I love about this idea is, part of it is that the way that we were socialized is not our fault. Let me repeat that, because it's really important. The way that we were socialized is not our fault. We didn't ask to be socialized this way. It just happens. But it is our responsibility to find new ways of being, new ways of communicating, new ways of relating to ourselves and to our loved ones. So I think that it does change you when you become exposed to the idea, and it will eventually trickle down to how we parent our boys. And the thing that's interesting about that is, it's not just our boys, it's our girls too. Because is it okay? Is swearing okay on this podcast?
Well, you're gonna have to ask Nathan there. Nathan's the guy that just
or can you bleep it out if
we've already done it 3 or 4 times?
Okay, so my apologies, but I think we have to talk about this. So look at some of the major insults that we're told growing up. It's don't be a bitch, don't be a little girl, and don't be a pussy. Those are 3 insults that are some of the worst insults you can be called, besides insulting your sexuality. And what are they? They're all hits at being feminine. They're all the essence of femininity. And so what the implicit message is there is that anything that's feminine is bad and worth less. Now, there's one problem there, that we're telling that to little boys, young men. And that's a whole issue unto itself. The other side of it, though, to consider is there's little girls and young women hearing these same insults. And the message is, you are not worth as much. And this is all wrapped up in this culture of sexism and misogyny. And, so I think the more that we can get the idea out there and the more that we can get people aware of the language they're using and how they parent or how they coach, the better off really society is going to be.
Yeah, I think you really touched on one thing. I think the language is important. I didn't even put the two together. You're absolutely right. The biggest names that we call each other as guys, it has to do with being the feminine. So that's really interesting. That was just an aha moment for me on
Yeah.
that side.
And the other part of it is we've all done this, right? I've done this. So none of us are really exempt from this, but don't let that stop you from changing your behavior, changing your messaging, and changing how you are. I mean, because I think one of the arguments against it is, oh, you're a hypocrite. Well, yes, I'm a hypocrite, and so are everyone else out there. So we've all done it. It's just about changing generational patterns. And to do that, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky part too, especially in relationships. And there's a guilt factor that comes into that too, is that when you catch yourself doing something, you're like, oh man, I'm just a screw up. But I think we have to understand is that you're never going to be a perfect spouse. You're never going to be a perfect father. There's always going to be mistakes, but it's catching those times as often as you can, because we do forget. There's times where we get pissed off. Like I openly say, there's times where I yell at my kids, and it's very seldom, but I've had to tone it down because I realized, well, I've been yelling more than I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so it's just being that self-aware. So the other question I have for you is, what kind of environment and working with relationships do you find actually works the best? So is it having them sit in a room together? Is it doing retreats? Is it just talking to one spouse and then another spouse? Where do you see the biggest impact there?
It's a great question. I think my answer would be in two of those three places. So I personally don't like doing couples work in an office. Partly just from a selfish reason, I don't want to sit there and listen to two people argue, because I think once we're arguing and in conflict and once the heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute, then you're emotionally flooded, and then you're not listening to anything your partner has to say. It's wasted time, in my opinion. The other part would be, I like one-on-one because I can teach more to the individual, and they can take in these concepts in a calm way and then begin to apply them. And then I can hold them accountable for, are you applying them? The other one I really like is the retreat model, because it gives you, let's say, a week to be with your partner, learn these new the tools, put them into practice in a calm setting. So you don't have the kids at you, you don't have the pressures of work. And a lot of this is about creating new habits after you learn the tools. So you need practice and repetition to do that. So I would prefer the retreats and individual.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a good point. Nathan, I don't know if you have any questions, because I don't want to be hogging them all.
I have one, maybe a little bit of pushback. And that is, I totally get where you're coming from with guys needing to be more communicative. I totally get where you're coming from, where I believe there are some, I hate the term toxic masculinity, but I know that there are certain parts of masculinity that probably don't serve us. But at the same time, it seems like there's an extreme push to swing the pendulum to the opposite direction in society. It seems like there's an extreme push to, and I hate to use it, but it's the only word I can think of, to pussify men, to make men subjective, and to make men sissies. And I feel like there needs to be a balance, or a healthy joining of the two. But I mean, we're men, and I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's wrong for men to have more masculine energy than feminine energy. I don't think that we should be completely devoid of feminine energy, but I see a lot in society now where it's trying to just completely push masculinity completely out the window and feminize men. And I'm not sure that that's what that's what you're advocating, but I do see that when we start talking about these, it's a very slippery slope to the third wave extreme feminism, where everything about men is wrong. And Boys need to, I mean, our education system is tailored towards the way girls learn now. More girls are graduating from college than men are. Under the age of 30, girls are actually earning more than men in most careers now. And a lot of girls that I know that are in that age range are saying there are no men anymore for me to date. All of the men have been over feminized. So I would like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I'm not looking to over feminize men at all. What I'm looking for is a balance. And if it really comes down to kind of subtlety and nuance, and you got to look at each of these traits with more specificity. So for instance, self-reliance. If you look at self-reliance on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being I'm not self-reliant at all and 10 being overly self-reliant, most of us men have been socialized to be, let's say, 8, 9, or 10 on that, right? We're really bad at asking for help, which, a lot of times isn't that big a deal until we get to a point where we really need help. Like we're really depressed, or we're really struggling in a relationship, or we're really mangling it at work. And then we still won't ask for help. And, I've got a friend's dad that pulled his own teeth out in his garage with a pair of pliers because he was self-reliant. So, I think that if you look at it, what I'm shooting for often is like a 6 on these scales. So I think we're looking at a balance. It's not that we want to go to a 1. We don't want to go to a 1 on any of these, because I agree with you. I mean, I think masculinity is there for a reason. It's needed. It's necessary. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, I love being a man. I love being a masculine man. And I think that we need to learn some new skills to tack on to traditional masculinity to create sort of a more positive masculinity. And you're right, I hate that term toxic masculinity, because you use that term and men just shut down. And again, it's not about you as an individual, it's about how we're socialized. And just looking at that with some curiosity and some awareness to say, which of these pieces of traditional masculinity are working for me, and which ones do I want to say titrate, but kind of modify, and which ones, what is there, if anything, that I want to bolt onto the front end moving forward. So I think it's more about looking at traditional masculinity and questioning it, because your ideal of masculinity can be different from mine, and that's fine. I would argue that there is not one perfect form of masculinity. And I think the BS we've been pitched, not even with awareness, is that, the character of Arnold Schwarzenegger or Bruce Willis or Vin Diesel is the ultimate form of masculinity in the movies. And I think we get those messages over and over and over and over and over again for hundreds of thousands of times growing up, without any awareness, without questioning at all. And then we try and get there. And, there's a saying that masculinity is hard won and easily lost. And so, we try and achieve and achieve and achieve, which is great until we can't achieve anymore. And then it's really hard to pick back up again. So there's a big element of competitiveness in masculinity as well, that I think that can shoot us in the foot too. I mean, I think we can learn to be more cooperative and collaborative. I like the idea of an alpha male being one who can get other alpha males to cooperate and collaborate using words. I think that's an excellent definition of alpha. So
yeah, I think that's. Yeah, I think you made some really good points there. I think one of the things that you talked about was the skill behind it. And I think that's important to realize, is that emotional awareness, for example, emotional intelligence is a skill. And just because you have it doesn't mean that it's part of your identity. It's like saying, well, just because I know how to cut grass doesn't mean I'm a landscaper. It just means I have the skill to do so. So the same goes for other components. Being aware, having emotional intelligence, being able to be in tune with your feelings. I think as men, we're afraid to attach that to our identity, rather than just say, hey, it's a skill that I can flex, that I can utilize to the best of my advantage to make my life that much more fulfilling, to make my relationship that much more fulfilling. And I think that's where the work that you do, John, is so important, because it is a skill. You're teaching the skill behind it, right? And by utilizing that skill, that's how people shift, and that's how people change and live happier lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks for the question, Nathan. It's a good question.
Yeah. Leave it to Nathan to stir the pot. So Nathan, I'm gonna throw it. I know we just got a couple of minutes here. We're gonna be closing up real soon here. I'm gonna throw it to you. If you have any more questions, if not, I got one more.
I don't. Go ahead.
So Dr. John, if you could give one piece of advice to guys out there, what would it be when it comes to their relationships?
Oh boy, there's I think part of it is to tell yourself you're a really curious person, that you're a lifelong learner, that you're open to learning new skills to be better in relationship, because there are so many scientifically proven tools out there that you can learn and get better at relationship. They're not hard. They're just something that you need to become aware of and put into practice. So, to tell yourself you're curious, you've got a growth mindset as far as your relationships go. One of the things that drives me nuts is men that say, well, this is just me, like love me or leave me. Like, to me, that's such a, it's such a cop out that, to think that everything about relationships from what, the fact that you fell in love. Like, love is not enough. Like, we need to keep learning, because by learning these new skills, we can become better in relationship. And then you become happier and more fulfilled in life.
Wow, that was awesome, because I love that. Because chances are, if you say, "Hey, look, take me or leave me," a lot of women these days will leave you. So I think you got to be wary of that in terms of how you approach it. So I love that. Lifelong learning is an absolute must. So I personally want to thank you for being on the show. And so where can listeners go to find out more about the work that you do? I know you got a cool podcast out there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Purdeep. I've got a podcast called The Evolved Caveman, which is on the major podcasting platforms. You can also look at or find out more at theevolvedcaveman.com or guidetoself.com, or find out about the couples retreat that we're planning in September of 2020 in Costa Rica at theultimaterelationship.com. Thank you.
Wow, that sounds pretty cool. Costa Rica, my kids love that place.
Awesome.
So yeah, if you're looking to get some relationship advice and go on a vacation, that sounds like a wicked retreat to me.
All right. Until next time, if you want to catch more episodes of this podcast, Pradeep, where can listeners go?
Well, simply you can go to youtubeformen.com or malepodcast.com.
Awesome. Thank you again, Dr. John, for coming on. We appreciate it. And until next time, we will catch you all later.
Thank you.